Hi, today I'm talking about one of the most important things that you need to master if you want to have control over your mental health. And this is something that's commonly called self-awareness. And I like to use that phrase, but I also sometimes like to call it active mindfulness, which is basically the following. It's being aware of how you feel, what you're thinking, what you're doing whilst you're doing it. Because if you're aware of what you're doing, thinking, feeling whilst you're doing it, you have the opportunity for choice. You have the possibility of deciding to do this or that. Whereas when you're completely captured by the emotion, you've really got no choice. You have to do what the emotion makes you do. And usually, well, not usually perhaps, but often that turns out to be a mistake. So if you're angry, you don't necessarily want to act in an angry way because it's not the best thing that you could do for your life. Likewise, if you're feeling really horrible about yourself, if you're feeling really anxious, if you're feeling really down, you don't necessarily want to act on those emotions because they don't push you forward in the way that you would logically, kind of in the cool light of day, want to go. So I think there's a lot of mileage, a lot of value in developing active mindfulness or self-awareness. So let me start you off with a story. A samurai went to a wise Zen master and he said, "I want you to teach me about heaven and hell." The Zen master said, "I can't be bothered to talk to you, you're a lout." The samurai pulled out his sword. He says, "I could kill you for being so insolent." And that, said the Zen master, is hell. The samurai was taken aback by the insight he just gained, and he put his sword away and he said to the Zen master, "Thank you for the teaching." And the Zen master said, "And that is heaven." So in the first instance, the samurai was engulfed by anger and was about to act impulsively on that anger. And that's hell, because basically you have no control over what you do. You are a hostage to your emotions. But being able to reflect upon your emotions and being able to then make a decision, that's heaven, because that's the best it can be. So whatever else you do in your life, the best sort of attentional capacity you can bring is to be aware of yourself in the moment. This is what all of the mindfulness, the meditation, all of the sort of the spiritual training is all about, getting you to be aware of yourself in the moment, to understand what you're feeling, understand what you're thinking, and kind of experience it in a clean, first-hand way. I would say it's invariably the case that when people come to see me in my clinic, they are engulfed by their emotions. They feel swamped by their emotional experience, and they feel that they have no real ability to separate themselves from that experience. So it'll be a bit like being incredibly stressed or incredibly down or incredibly anxious, and it just doesn't feel like there's anywhere to go. Now, engulfed by your emotions is a non-mindful, non-self-aware state. But it's definitely a really common state, and if you read comments on Facebook, people post all sorts of different things, but they're usually posting things from an engulfed emotional position where they feel like they're overwhelmed and they don't know what to do and they're asking for help, let's say. Typically when people seek help for mental health problems like panic and depression, anxiety, etc., they're going to be in one of three positions, and typically they're either going to feel engulfed or they're going to feel accepting of their emotional experience. But neither of those is helpful. So let me explain. I think the most common situation is where people feel engulfed. They feel overwhelmed by their emotional experience. They feel swamped by their emotions. Their emotions might change a lot, but it just feels out of control. So if I was to say to someone, "Do you feel in control?" they go, "No." Okay. So when you're engulfed by your emotions are in charge of you. So if you happen to feel anger, you act on that anger because you're enmeshed with it, you're engulfed by it. If you feel down, you act on that. If you feel anxious, you act on that. The emotions are in charge of you. And when the emotions are in charge of you, you've got no choice. And if you have no choice, you have no control. So it's really common to do lots of things that are unhelpful. And you would go, "Yes, that's unhelpful. I wish I hadn't have done that." But in the moment, I felt like I had to do it. So engulfed is a really unhelpful state, but very common. When you talk to people who have had like problems for a long time, like I've been anxious all my life, or I've been depressed for 20 years, There's a real strong accepting position where, it's just what it is, right? I've been depressed for 20 years. It's just what it is. I just accept that I'm a depressed person, or I just accept that I'm an anxious person. And that accepting situation is really unhelpful, because it kind of implies whatever the emotion is that you experience, that's it. That's okay. Whatever the emotion is, it's appropriate for me to experience this emotion. But of course it's not. Because all sorts of things can trigger your emotions, internal things or external things. And if you just always accept that your emotion is appropriate, then it's going to be a bit of a roller coaster. One of the really damaging things, I think, about being universally accepting of how you feel is that there's very little motivation to change. Now that's fine if you're always happy and, lighthearted. You don't need a motivation to change. But if you're always down or anxious and you accept that that's just what it is, then no motivation to change is only ever going to keep you stuck. And that's just horrible. And I think the saddest thing is that it's unnecessary. Neither of these emotional positions is helpful, because it puts your emotions in charge of virtually everything that you do. Of course, emotions are important. Without emotions, life will be flat, colourless, and extremely boring. But emotions are not the only information we have available to us. We also have intentions of things that we want to achieve. We also have relationships that we want to build. We have things that we want to do that are exciting. We want to make our life go how we want it to go. And if you're on an emotional roller coaster, you can't do that. So we need to have a third emotional position. And this is self-aware or actively mindful. And that basically means that you are aware of your emotion. Let's say you can label your emotion. Okay, I recognize that I feel angry. But being able to say those words, I recognize that I feel angry, means that you are not completely captured by the experience. You have the ability to reflect upon it. I recognize that I feel angry. And now you have the choice to act in an angry way or to not act in an angry way, depending upon what works best for you in your life. So always having to have an outburst is unlikely to be productive. Always having to feel guilty, always having to please people, always having to sacrifice yourself, always having to do what your emotions tell you to do is going to make it incredibly difficult to move things forward in your life how you would like them to go. If you have an ambition to do anything in your life, being in thrall, being captured by your emotions will make that impossible. So self-aware is being able to recognize how you feel, recognize what you're thinking, recognize what you're doing whilst you're doing it, and therefore be able to exercise some choice over whether this emotion is useful to you in the context of your greater life goals or whether it's not useful to you. When you have choice, you have control. So in a self-aware position, we have choice. In an engulfed and accepting position, we don't really have choice. And you always want to have more choice. Now, in many years of working with clients, I've come up with a little drawing which I will share with you. It's this. These are your problems. And if you are in an engulfed or accepting position, this is you. Right in the middle of your problems. So these are your problems, this is you, and here you would tend to say, I am the problem. Because that's what it feels like, particularly an engulfed position where you feel overwhelmed by emotions, swamped, I am the problem. But you can see, of course, if you always believe that you are the problem, there's absolutely no motivation to change, and that's the problem with that position. Engulfed and accepting. No motivation to change because it just doesn't seem possible. And what we need to do is to move to this position here. In this position here, we have a perspective on your problems. Here we say, I am not the problem, but I have a problem. I'm not the problem, but I have a problem. Okay, I'm not the problem, but I have a problem. That little bit of perspective, which enables you to say, I am not the problem, but I have a problem, gives you enough distance to be able to recognize your emotional experience, but not be captured by it. But then to be able to make choices. I recognize that I'm feeling angry right now. Okay, now I can choose to act in an angry way, or I can choose to act in a way that works better for my life goals, my life plans. If you're always acting on the emotional roller coaster, You're never going to be able to achieve anything meaningful because you will always be sabotaging yourself because you're acting out your emotion, irrespective of whether it's a good or clever thing to do in the moment. So with this position here, I am not the problem, but I have a problem. It enables us to get that little bit of distance that enables us to start to function as we would wish to function. Now, my suggestion is this. This little diagram here, which is just the one that I happen to draw with clients, right? Draw it out for yourself, put it on a post-it, put it somewhere on the fridge, on the mirror, whatever. And every time you see it, say, I am not the problem, but I have a problem. Okay. And just think, what does that mean? It means that I do not have to be engulfed. I do not have to be overwhelmed and swamped by my emotions. I don't need to accept just automatically my emotional state, because they will always keep you stuck. Instead, I am not the problem, but I have a problem. What's my problem? My problem is that I'm overly emotional. My problem is that I'm depressed. My problem is that I'm anxious. I panic. I have OCD. All of these problems are resolvable, but only from the position of I have a problem, not I am the problem. I would say that this is perhaps one of the most fundamental lessons that I could perhaps share with you, because if you would say things like, I've been anxious for many years, I've been anxious all my life, I've been depressed for years, I've been depressed all my life, I've always struggled with psychological problems, you are probably feeling like you are the problem. And that's why nothing changes. To make things change, I am not the problem, but I have a problem. And then you can use tools and resources and strategies to change the problem. And it's absolutely very doable. It just takes a bit of perspective. Socrates, the Greek philosopher, said, know thyself. What he really meant was, know what you're feeling, know what you're experiencing, be able to recognize what's going on in you, and then be able to choose whether you act upon it or not. Thanks for taking the time to watch and listen.